July 7th, 1989. Almost there, almost there. Honey, are you feeling all right? How am I feeling, you hearing idiot? Finally, a baby was born into the world. The nurse took the baby and was shocked to see that its eyes were wide open. Never before had the nurse seen a baby with its eyes open when it was born. I was born. My family, my deaf family, gathered around, and my grandfather came up to look at me. And when he touched me, I was startled. My family looked around at each other and celebrated. He's deaf! He's deaf! Woohoo! He's deaf! The door opened and the doctor came out, wondering what all the commotion was about. My family turned to him and said, "He's deaf!" The doctor said, that baby is not deaf. That baby is hearing. My mother turned to the doctor and said, "How do you know?" The doctor said, "I am a professional. I know. That baby is not deaf. It is hearing, okay?" My mother replied back, "I'm a mother." My mother decided to go to an audiologist. She went to the audiologist's office and a woman came out into the room. The audiologist brought my mother to a chair and took me and told my mother that she was going to perform a special test, a very special test. She got a special instrument, a very special instrument. My mother was very curious what this special instrument might be, and the woman came back with a cowbell. My mother said to the audiologist, "You're using a cowbell with my baby?" "I'm going to do a special test, a very special test. Watch." And she took the cowbell and waved it behind my head. And when I didn't do anything, she moved the cowbell around to the side of my head, and as she moved the cowbell, I caught sight of it and looked at the cowbell. And the audiologist said, "Oh, the baby's hard of hearing." My mother said, I don't think that test works. Watch me with my hand. I'll wave it behind my baby's head, and when I put it to the side of its head, it's going to see my hand." See? The baby's not hard of hearing. It can see my hand. The audiologist said, "I know I'm a professional. That baby's hard of hearing, not deaf." My mother said, "Well, I'm a mother." My mother heard of this special test, but I had to wait until I was 1 year old before I could take the test. And so my mother waited for 1 year, and finally she brought me for this special test. They put these wires into my ear, plugged them into a machine. My mother was in the waiting room, rocking back and forth, wondering what the test would say. The nurse came out and looked frightened. My mother thought, "What's wrong? What's wrong?" And the nurse looked as if someone had died. My mother said, "Tell me what's wrong with my son." "Oh no, what's wrong with my son? What's wrong?" And the nurse said, "What's wrong with my son?" My mother cried, "What am I going to do? Oh no, my son's not okay. What's wrong?" And the nurse said, "I'm so sorry. Your son is deaf." My son is deaf? Yes. Just deaf? Yes. Yes! My family cried in celebration and hugged one another. It's true, it's true. He's really deaf. My mother cried out in excitement. And she took me into her arms and looked at me wondering, this baby's going to be like my father. Later, she was pushing me in the stroller when along came a man, a great big farmer. And the farmer said, "Oh, what a cute baby!" And my mother said, "I just found out that the baby's deaf." "Oh," the farmer replied, "he's deaf? Oh my, well, you know." He thought he was a wise old farmer who knew everything, and that anything he said would make people feel better. And so the farmer said, "You know, when life gives you lemons, you make lemonade." And my mother said, "My son is not a lemon." When I was 3 years old, with curly, cute hair, and I was a cute kid, trust me, my mother thought to herself that I was deaf, just like so many other members of our family members whom she had seen oppressed. And she knew that the future carried the same oppression for me. And she wanted to explain that to me, and so she called me to her and sat me down on her bed. And I sat cross-legged on her bed as my mother told me that the world is full of hearing people who don't understand the deaf, and that I would be oppressed. And when I saw my mother sign that sign with those big mother hands, the word oppressed, I was upset and I yelled back at her, "No, get them off, get them off, get them off." And I stood up and ran out of the room. That night, my mother prayed a long prayer. My God, hear my prayer. With my hands I shout to you. Aren't you the one who brought to me a child whose ears are broken? When the nurse came in, I saw her face stricken by bad news. I thought my son was dying and had just a few weeks to live. But she told me instead that my son was hearing impaired, that his ears were not working. All our hands waved in the air. "He's deaf. My son is deaf." Now I ask, where is that spirit? Because it is here no more. Or was there never such a spirit? Was it just hopeless deaf pride babbling? Deaf means pain. Deaf means oppression. And why does it have to be my son? A pain upon him? 5 times upon me. A sting for him? A stab for me. Forgive me, but I think I have forgotten who makes man deaf or mute. I think I have forgotten the noblest gift you have given to deaf people. Sign language, so beautiful. Fools are those who think not. It must be your majestic hands, the same hands that you use to create magnificent mountains and serene seas, that created the language for the deaf. It must be your tears for their sufferings that bring colors to the language. Out of the language came forth the culture of the eyes, deaf culture. This I shall protect with my soul and pass on to my children. That God you are, still my soul is. That God you are, liberated we are. To the hearing, this child laying in my arms is broken and needs to be fixed. But to me, this child is a perfect gift that is delivered to me from your hands. Now I pray to you, my God, that everywhere you will protect my son from the claws of oppressors that are dripping with the blood of innocence. That you will lead him to Martha's vineyard for the fruits of righteous fellowship. Last of all, have mercy and grant him the courage to be. Amen. As I grew up and became older and older, my mom again felt that it was time to explain more about the oppression that I would face in this world. So once again, she sat me down and said, in the future, there are hearing people who will oppress you. And I told my mother, what does oppression mean? And my mom thought, and she said to me, your deaf grandmother, when I was a kid, would tell me stories. And now I want to tell these stories to you. Long ago, during your grandparents' time, all over the United States, at the deaf schools, sign language was banned, and students were forced to be oral. If they were caught signing, the students would be punished severely. Your grandmother told me a story that her and her friends in the dorms at night would quietly get out of bed and sneak over to the window, and in the moonlight they would sit with one another and take advantage of the light to teach each other sign and to sign with one another because they couldn't during the day. And there would always be one girl at the door looking under the door to make sure none of the house parents came. But one night, the girl who was supposed to be on watch was so caught up in the signing, because all day she had been without language, that she failed to notice a house parent come into the room, and when they did, they all rushed into their beds, but one girl, as she was running back to her bed, was hit by the house parent and flew across the room and hit her head on one of the old metal heaters. And my grandmother remembered waking up and seeing the house parents standing over the body of the girl in the moonlight, taking her body out of the room. They never saw that girl again. And years later, they found out that that night, the girl died in the name of language. That story was etched in my mind and my heart. And as I grew older and older, it remained into my heart until one day I had to take it from my heart and tell that story to the world. And so I took that story and made it into a poem. A poem that I had to tell to the hearing people of the world as well. A quiet moonlight shines through a window, brightening the side of the room that is no longer hollow. The light awakens the mute ones, and away is the brokenness, come is the happiness. It is brighter, hands go flying. It is louder, eyes are hearing. The light floats under the door. There, the darkness sits. Hope is no more. Joyful sounds from the room come to their end in the ears of doom. The devil marches down the hall. Fire of her torch startles all. To their cradles, to their dreams. Poor one loses her handle. She hits the reams. Her head cracks. Girls, say goodnight. For hope is scattered. Joy is night. Good night, moonlight. It went down, and the sun lightens the broken town. It heralds that day, the death of beauty, buried away. The hope is fading. A quiet moonlight shines through a window, brightening the side of the room that is no longer hollow.